Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. Of course I start talking when my kids get incredibly loud, but you know what, that's fine. Today I'm going to be wrapping up everything I read in August. Can you all believe it's August? I feel like that's just the thing that we say these days, or that the end of August is over. That's already September. What in the world? I can't believe fall is upon us, autumn is upon us, and yeah, August was a really interesting reading month. So if you are new to my channel and you find yourself enjoying this video, if you're new, then hello. Hi, I'm Shelly. I forget to introduce myself sometimes, and that's okay. But if you find yourself just enjoying, the vibe, then I would encourage you to subscribe, stick around, and without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. A couple of things went on this month that were really interesting, one of which was that I co-hosted Garb August, and so I'm going to go through my books and I'm going to ask the question, is it garbage? And then I will answer it for you. Like, is the book garbage? And then I'll give you a definitive yes or no answer. So that's the agenda of the video. Also, what went on this month is that we are in Booker season, and you will come to find out that I have not read any Booker books. I think that the busyness of my life has fully overshadowed. Hello, Harry. Hi, baby. So as I've gotten busier with other things like teaching, the reality is that things get pushed out. I don't have time for every single thing that I want to do or that I would like to do. There's nothing like starting the school year or starting something new like a job to realize, what you actually reprioritize. And one of the things that I am reprioritizing is prize season. Oh my goodness, Harry. My goodness, Harry. So I did this naturally, but all of a sudden I started work. I got really, really busy. And I forgot about the Booker. I straight up forgot. I mean, I know the internet is still going gaga over the Booker, but I'm like, y'all, I don't have time. I don't have time to read it. I don't have time to think about it. I've been watching reviews, and the book that I'm now most interested in is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray, because everyone's talking about how great it is. And even then, I'm like, do I want to read it? Is it the thing that I want? Should I hop on that bandwagon? I'm like, I don't know. And I don't got time to think about it. And so that's been really interesting as like a facet of my reading life. That is my mini schnauzer, Harry. He's a silly little boy. He's so sweet and bossy. And he's not bossy. He's sweet and playful. He wants to constantly just play. And then every once in a while, he'll want to snuggle. But he is like one of the boys. I have two human boys and one fur baby, and he just wants to be like a human boy and play, and that is his life. I am going to go chronologically in the order in which I read these books, and then I will answer whether it is trash or not. So the first book I read in August was Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses. I did a whole review on this book. I actually think I was wearing this top for that review. I really love this top, is what it says. And this is a fantasy romance, young adult fantasy romance, though it is a bit spicy for it to be a young adult. I actually don't know if I would even recommend this to young adults, but technically it is a young adult fantasy romance about a young woman, Farah, who makes a mistake and becomes the captive, I don't know if that's the right word, of a high lord, I think, in the fairy realm. And from there, it ends up going bananas. Sarah J. Maas is not for me, y'all. I mean, she's just not. I love that some of y'all just love her. Like, I love it for y'all. Like, if you love Sarah J. Maas and she is your jam and you can get down with one of her books and, like, you are picking up what she's putting down, I love it for you. I am not picking up what she is putting down in the least. Someone is messing with the door. I just didn't buy it. And, like, even as I was reading, I could feel myself not buying it. I could feel myself not was just not the thing for me. And I like, there's just other books like this, like at this level of writing and storytelling, that I think I like a bit more than I liked this. So yeah, Mass, this is like the first and last Mass I'll probably read, unless I feel like I want to embark on another reading experiment in which I read totally outside of my normal comfort zone, and then maybe I'll pick up Sarah J. Maas again. But otherwise, I'm just like, one and done, and I am done. Like, I'm done. Oh, was it garbage? Yes. Yes, it was. In my honest opinion, it was just, was it garbage? Was it ever? Then I continued on with the Edward St. Aubyn series of Patrick Melrose. The Patrick Melrose series written by Edward St. Aubyn, which is a semi-autobiographical story of a young man who's, in his young life, was very mistreated and abused by quite selfish and hoity-toity parents. And I'm now at the fourth book in the series, Mother's Milk, and Mother's Milk is sort of hailed as like the book in the series. And the thing is that there's, okay, how do I get into it? There is this concept out there in literature, like a literary theory out there, in which there is a time when we are all pre-language. Like, you're born, you don't know any language. And in those experiences, you're not filtering it all through language. Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote this theory. I learned about it in college. And then there is a point in which we are filtering all of our experiences through language. That, you know, it is now the thing that we use in order to contextualize our experiences. And what was really interesting about Mother's Milk is that, I mean, even Jean-Jacques Rousseau is even mentioned in the book. So somewhere along the way, Edward St. Aubyn learned about this theory and thought it was super interesting and decided to think about language in a really dynamic way. And so there is this like little kid narrating. Is he narrating? I can't remember. But there's like this little kid who remembers the time in which he lived his life before language, and what that experience was like, which is just like kind of bananas and off the rails as a concept. And then he's like reflecting, even at 5 years old, at how he knows language now, and there was a time in which he did not live his life this way. It was really interesting, and there are a bunch of different ways in which Edward St. Aubyn talks about language, and you can see that through the characters. And when language fails us, when we lose language, like in our older years, and we have no longer have the access or the mental ability to access language in the way that we once did. It was so cool. Like, it was just really interesting. But what I loved about it was that it was such a throwback for me, because I had learned about this theory in college. And so even as I was reading it, like, I knew, even before he referenced Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I was like, I think that he's like playing around with this concept that Rousseau wrote about. And then, of course, then he does this little nod to Rousseau, like the main character. I think Patrick Melrose is like reading Rousseau. I was like, oh yeah, okay, I know what you're doing. But instead of it being like, I know what you're doing and I don't like it, I was like, I know what you're doing and I'm loving this. This is really cool. And I could see absolutely why everybody like hails the book and says it's so good. And truly, it's like one of those books that I think would stand, it could easily just, like, you could just read it. You could just read it out, like, just read it as a standalone and not as like the fourth book in the series. And it would be really fascinating. I could also see this being like a very polarizing, like a Marmite book. Marmite is, I've never had it, but apparently it's very polarizing, or like Napoleon Dynamite-esque. Like, it's very, you either love it or you don't. And I could see some people really picking up what it's putting down, like me, and I could see some people also being just like, I don't like it. I read the Edward St. Aubyn book with my friend Fraser, and I really, really enjoyed having someone to discuss my excitement about the book with someone. So thank you, Fraser, for reading that with me. Let's see, Mother's Milk. Is it garbage? No, absolutely not. It's not garbage at all. It was good. It was really good. It just couldn't, like, it was the definition of literary. Although literary could be garbage. It was not garbage, though. Okay, the next book I read was C.J. Sanson's Disillusion. I read this with my friend Anita. We were on a bit of a tutor kick. We read The Other Boleyn Girl together, and then we read Disillusion. And this is the first book in the Matthew Shard Lake series, which is, again, set in Tudor times. Matthew Shard Lake is he's connected to and does the bidding of Thomas Cromwell. If you know my channel really well, then you will know that one of my favorite series, if not my favorite series of all time, is Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall series, which gives you this nuance and complex and beautiful and absolutely stunning. Like, the writing is stunning, the characterization is stunning of Thomas Cromwell. So it was really interesting to see Thomas Cromwell in a totally different light and very villainesque. Cromwell doesn't play a huge part in the novel. It's mostly about this hunchback, Matthew Shard Lake, who is he's investigating a murder, and it was really good. It was really good. It was really interesting. It's the first book in like a 10 or 11 book, 9, I mean, it's somewhere up there, series that C.J. Sanson has written. And it was just really cool to be back in Tudor times and to be hanging out in that time period. We were hanging out so Matthew Shard Lake is he's a very sympathetic individual. He's a hunchback, he has some deformities, he has a lot of ways that he feels about himself and the way that he moves through the world and the way that people perceive him. And he's also very smart, and so he's on this case to investigate this murder, and that brings him to a monastery with monks. I think that's right. And so you're getting not only this commentary about what it's like to move through the world as somebody who is physically different than others, but you're also seeing the way that the monks have taken to the change in religion in England, and that was really fascinating. And so it was layered, it was well written, it was really thoughtful, and it also just served up a really good mystery. So I would say that sometimes mysteries, like mystery novels, are considered garbage. This is not garbage. It was so good. It was so interesting. And I really loved it. And I have the next book, I think it's the next book, on my Kindle already. And I'm just so grateful. This was a recommendation from Steve Donahue. So I'm grateful to Steve Donahue for recommending it. And I'm also grateful for Anita reading this with me and kind of giving me that little nudge to finally pick it up. And it was just so good. The next book that I read was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Where to start with this book? Well, if you've been following my journey for like a short amount of time, like more recent videos, you will know that I was really gripped by the marketing of this book. I knew that it was going to have some commentary about who can write what, like who, in the publishing industry, who's allowed to write what, and why do things get published. And specifically, it was talking about, Asian culture and how, the premise of the book says it all. There are two writers, one of whom is incredibly successful and one of whom is not. The incredibly successful writer is Asian, and she is just like cuckoo bananas crazy, like the most successful writer out there, and has some celebridom that goes with her writing accolades. And then she has a friend who is not a successful writer, and she is a white woman. So the very famous friend ends up in the first chapter ends up dying in quite a slapsticky way. And the white friend, I think her name's June ends up finding this manuscript of her now dead friend and taking it as her own and getting it published under her own name. And it's sort of this question of like, you know, is it okay? Is it okay for, like, what shades of gray are there when it comes to who can write what, and, you know, taking the work of someone else and making it your own, and when does it become your own versus when does it stay the other person's piece of art, and it's the consequences of those decisions. And on the whole, that idea is really interesting to me. Like, the idea is fascinating. And then I had heard that the book goes off the rails. Now, to me, the book was kind of just meandering and sort of plotless. And there's, like, of course, the character of, like, the Twitter mob who is kind of regulating things and, you know, going out to cancel certain people. Like, that whole Twitter mob, which is not even called Twitter anymore. It's called X, right? Am I right? It's not even Twitter. It's X. And so it, like, the book already feels dated. Now, of course, that's not R.F. Kuang's fault, like, that she didn't know that Twitter was going to be turned into X. But I just felt like it was a bit, it's like, I've already heard this before, like, the Twitter mob and being canceled, and it just played out in the way that I thought it was going to play out. And then the main character was kind of annoying, and I was just like, okay, at some point I was just like not enjoying myself, and I was sort of hoping that the book was going to go cuckoo's bananas crazy, like off the rails, wild, in the way that Bunny by Mona Awad does. Like, it just explodes, and it is wild. Bunny by Mona Awad. Woo, that book is amazing. And I wanted Yellowface to do the same thing. Like, I wanted it to just go to a place that was magical and weird and down, like, very Alice in Wonderland-y, but, like, in this twisted and even dark way. Like, I wanted that. That's what I wanted. After, like, getting to probably the 2/3 part, I was like, I'm done with you. You're very, like, Juniper, the main character, super annoying. Like, I'm really not feeling this plot. We're just gonna move on. Like, I'm not really loving the question. The question is not very as deep as I thought she was gonna take it. It's not very dynamic. It's kind of flat. It's falling flat. The plot is boring. And so I was, like, holding on. I was holding on for this wild ride at the end. And then I thought it just played out in the way that I thought it was gonna play out. It didn't go there. It didn't give me anything that I thought was, like, super interesting. And so I walked away feeling I felt like I had wasted my time, and I definitely felt like this is garbage. And at one point I was like, I want this to be nominated for the Booker. I knew not what I spoke, because I had not read this novel, but it is not Booker material. It is something else. And I don't know. It's kind of put me off to R.F. Kuang, but then I'm like, she has such huge fans out there for, like, Babel or Babel, the Tower of Babel, and for her Poppy Wars series. I own the first book in the Poppy Wars, and I'm like, can she write? Like, is she just not for me, or is she capable of writing? I own Babel on my Kindle, and I own the Poppy Wars physically. I own the first book physically. But it's kind of just like, I was just like, what is this? This is just terrible. And so, was it garbage? Yes, absolutely. I cannot recommend this to anybody. I just was like, this is terrible. It's terrible. And oh yeah, I was so glad to be done with it and moved on very quickly. When I moved on to, which we're going to move on really quick, is I moved on to Women Talking by Miriam Toews. Toews. Toes. I don't really know how to say it. She is a Canadian author, and I had heard really good things about it. I think the last person that spoke super highly of it was from Jess at Stalking Kafka. She said Women Talking was really good and really interesting. It ended up also, it's one of Shawn, the Book Maniac's favorite books. Like, it was his book of the year a few years back, and Fraser really loves it. So I had, like, heard really good things, and so I was looking for something to cleanse my palate, because it was, you know, Yellowface was not the thing. It was just, it put a really bad taste in my mouth. And so I was like, okay, something short, something to get me moving. And so Women Talking was, like, the perfect palate cleanser. It is about Mennonite women, and it says it in the introduction, but these women were drugged and assaulted by men in their community, and the women are trying to figure out what to do because Mennonite women, they don't know how to read, they don't know how to write, they speak their own like dialect, and they don't have any autonomy in their culture, in their society. And it's a very closed society in that I think it would be incredibly difficult, and you get this at the very beginning, for these Mennonite women to integrate into sort of like culture, like to just move out and live on their own. I don't know. I just, you get this sense that they've lived a very specific way for a very long time that is very countercultural, like countercultural to the norms of our culture today. And I don't know how well they would integrate not being able to read, not being able to write, not speaking the language of the country which they live into society and to make a living for themselves. And so they're really kind of put into, like, they're put in between a rock and a hard place because they don't have the skills to integrate into like a more normalized society, and yet they can't stay where they're at. And so I kind of use the word normal very loosely. I'm just more thinking of like, could they go out and get a job? And it's like, well, if you don't read or write or know the language, it would be really difficult to even get a job at something that would seem like rather like simple for those who have grown up in like in a more normalized culture. So these women have to make this decision, and I thought it was brilliant. I mean, the book was brilliant. So good, so interesting. There are truly unforgettable characters. And the way that it's written is that one of the men who has recently sort of returned to their area and is a teacher there, who the women trust, end up taking notes and taking like the minutes of their meeting. And so, he's transcribing for them because they can't transcribe for themselves. And so, but the whole thing is that if they don't forgive the men that had assaulted them, their soul, according to their beliefs, their soul is in peril. And yet, how can you forgive somebody for doing such terrible things intentionally to the women in this community and to maybe yourself and maybe to your child? How can you forgive them? So it is a clash of, beliefs and challenging your beliefs, and it's about forgiveness. The book is about forgiveness, and it's about love at the end of the day, like love with a capital L. It was just so good and so nuanced. It's really turned me on to Marianne Towes, I'm not really sure, and I would like to read something else by her. I was like, when I finished the book, I was like, I rarely ever am like, I must know the background of this author, but I left with that feeling, I must know the background of this author. She's just so interesting. And she wrote a very honest and sincere story. So good. It was just so good. So if you're looking for like, now it's not for the faint of heart. It is it's obviously talking about really heavy topics, but if you're interested in like the premise, and you can like really kind of, you have a bit of grit to you, or like you can handle some gritty things, I would just say it was phenomenal. It was a phenomenal read, and I think it will be one that will stick with me for a long time. So was it garbage? No, absolutely not. It was not garbage. It was so good. Finally, yay, I get to talk about the book that took me the longest to read. And it was really good. I mean, it was good. So the final book was The Jewel in the Crown by Paul Scott. This is book 1 in the Raj Quartet, so there are 3 more books coming alongside it. And it is set in the early 1940s in India. And so colonization is still happening. There is clearly an event. Like at the very beginning of the book, you understand that there is an event that happens. There is upheaval, there is unrest in India, and it's about piecing together what happened and how they got there, how this unrest sort of was triggered, and how things exploded, and also the aftermath of all of the events that happened. Ultimately, that's what it's about. And so Paul Scott he creates these really wild characters, like characters that are kind of bananas. They're really dynamic. And each character, so the book is it's done in this way where it's letters and interviews and diaries, memoirs and notes, and it's all this stuff. And you get these large chunks from one person's perspective. And of course, you don't stick with one person. You're constantly getting just so many different perspectives. And you're all centering around what happened, what sparked the unrest in India in the 1940s, early 1940s, and leading up to partition. And so you're getting all of these wild perspectives because his characters are just bananas. They're just so not your cookie cutter character. And Paul Scott is able to think about this event and this topic, the topic of colonization in India, the British that are there, why are the British there, the way that the Indian people felt, and their perception of what it was like to have colonizers occupying their country. It is also very much about race and what is and is not okay, the way that they perceive each other, both the Indians towards the British and the British towards the Indians. And he creates a really dynamic situation in which, what would it mean if you were Indian but grew up in Britain and then returned to India, and what would that mean? And so there's really fascinating questions that are boiling and bubbling and marinating underneath the story. And then there's the story, and the story is, at the heart of it, a love story. And that was really kind of the string that kept me going, because I wanted to know what happened, how did it happen, and it was really kind of pulling me along. But the text itself was so rich and layered and beautiful. And Paul Scott really just digs in, and he is so smart. And sometimes he's a bit meandering, and he really doesn't, he really makes the reader work for what they're reading. I would say that it was most akin to Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall series, that there's just a little bit of massaging as a reader that you have to sometimes I would have to go back and reread. Sometimes I would have to reread a whole section, and sometimes I'd have to reread a certain part. And it's all super dynamic and super interesting. The only thing is that I started reading it when I got really busy with school, and so it took me a really long time to read, and I think that my timing was not the best in terms of picking up a book that demanded so much of my attention, and so much of my time. It was just not the best for that. So my timing was a bit off. So I think that did hinder my love for the book, but it was such a good book. It was such an interesting and fascinating and just done by such a great author that I really think it will stick with me for a very long time. A very, very long time. And there, it's I just think that Paul Scott's passion for this time period, really the years leading up to partition in India, and his own interactions with the culture, I just thought it was really good. It was really well done, and like a slow clap to this piece of literature that I don't think it's talked about very much, to be honest with you. Like, I have heard Steve Donahue talk about it, and then my friend Anita, and I talked about it mostly with my friend Anita because she had read it before, and at some point about the halfway point, it's like we were both just saying, yeah, Paul Scott makes you work for it. Like, he makes you like, he demands your full attention. And in one sense, I really love when an author does that. I like books like that. And on another level, just the level of my life and the busyness of my life, I just also need to be aware that it's not something that I always want to dig into all the time. That's something that demanding. And so it was just kind of a mismatch in that way, but I don't regret reading it. It was definitely not garbage. It was so good. It was so, so good. And, you know, whenever I'm feeling that I need a little more Paul Scott in my life, there are 3 other books. And apparently there's a really, 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 really good television show taking the audience through the whole quartet. And I think it's available on YouTube. So it's called The Jewel in the Crown. So good though, really interesting. And I'm just so glad that I read it. Yeah, and so that's it. What have you read this month? What was your best read? What was your worst read? What was garbage? Tell me, let a girl know. I must know. Yeah, I think I had 2 garbagey reads, which is actually pretty good considering that I only read 6 books. So 33% of my reading was garbage, which is great for me. It's pretty high. And yeah, so that's it. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and spending this time with me. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye.